Welcome to the 13th Annual Thorndyke Lecture. Dr. Thorndyke comes from a long line of prominent Bostonians. He was the chief of the Harvard University Health Service, a surgeon at the MGH, and a doctor for Harvard University Athletics. He was the first one to require doctors to be present at football games. He introduced the football helmet. He introduced rules to decrease injuries. He studied the athlete's heart, and he introduced bracing and taping. Dr. Thorndyke published the first sports medicine books in 1938 and in 1941. And he's considered the father of sports medicine in the United States. In 2006, his sons endowed a chair at Harvard Medical School in honor of the father, and I'm the first Thorndyke professor. In 2008, I established a lectureship in sports medicine in honor of Dr. Thorndyke, and we've had prominent, internationally known doctors in sports medicine as the lecturers. And you can see the ones who have been prior Thorndyke lecturers. Now we're at the 13th annual lecture, and we're very proud to have our own Dr. John Warner as the 13th Thorndyke lecturer. Dr. Thorndyke was born in Texas, and even as a child, he exhibited his supernormal strength. He attended Colgate University and then Rochester School of Medicine. After internship and surgical residency in Rochester, he was a resident in the Harvard Combined Orthopedic Residency Program. He did many fellowships, including a sports medicine and shoulder fellowship at HSS. And then he moved to Pittsburgh, where he was the chief of the shoulder service for 8 years. Finally, we lured him back to Boston. He became associate professor, then in 2004, a full professor at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Warner's curriculum vitae, it's very small print, is 46 pages long, and I don't think we'll go through those, just too numerous to count. But let me take a step backward for a second. There was another shoulder great in Boston at Mass General, E.A. Codman, and he came up with this new concept, the end result idea, that a common sense that everybody should be determine whether or not the treatment has been successful. And he got into a lot of trouble. He was way ahead of his time. But Dr. Warner is cut from the same cloth. He started the Boston Shoulder Institute to measure outcomes and performance measurement and value-based care. So this is, again, thinking outside the box, and nobody else that I know does this, where he puts his results out in the public and lets the public see how well he's doing, and his operations very well. So I think this is among the probably the biggest accomplishments, I would say, that he's urging us all to look at our results and let the people know, and are we getting any value for our money? Dr. Warner has a wonderful wife, Geraldine, and 4 great kids. Dr. Warner Sr. practiced medicine until he was 90 years old, I believe. And here, so I think genetically speaking, we have JP around for a long time. This is Dr. Warner's family. And I'm very proud and happy to introduce Dr. John Warner as the 13th annual Augustus Thorndyke Lecturer in Sports Medicine.
Thanks, Bert.
Dr. Warner is a professor of orthopedics at Harvard, chief of the MGH Shoulder Service, director of the fellowship, acting chief of the Sports Medicine Service, and the chairman of our quality and safety. So thank you, John, for accepting this and being the lecturer.
So thank you very much. I thought I'd do something a little bit different. Every one of the people you showed before has talked about being a surgeon. And I think this group of participants may include many who are not surgeons. So let me dwell on that for a minute. I think that it's important to remember that surgeons, as I'm sure most of you are aware, are a different breed. We work through our career to achieve at a certain level, and we build our resumes. And we don't often usually understand principles of leadership or teamwork. And I think I want to use this as an opportunity to share with you a little bit of my journey, so you can maybe have some perspective that will inform and help each of you. And this goes not just for surgeons, this goes for non-surgeons as well. So a little bit of an introduction. Each of us is a sum of our experiences. I mean, at the end of this presentation, I'll talk a little bit about the sweet spot that everybody has to find. I've, as Bert showed, I'm a father. I think that's probably the best example of servant leadership, is being a parent. But I like to build things, and I have a lot of conflicts, as you see here. I'm not going to talk about really any of these except for one slide, and only in the context of leadership and creating value. I want to use this as an opportunity to just share with you an example, a perfect example of somebody who I think was a great servant leader. And by this, I mean that he really fulfilled what Paul Colwell said, that the world is changed by your example, not by your opinion. And that's Jesse Jupiter. Jesse Jupiter, for I think upwards of 4 decades, has been here, one of the greatest surgeons I've ever known. And you can see here in the smile, everybody's faces where he works, the influence he has on people. I think it's appropriate to mention him because yesterday was his last day operating in the ambulatory center, a facility that I had the pleasure to help create with him and several others, you included, Bert. I also want to comment on the executive leadership of this department. Leadership is really the secret sauce that gets people to do things that make an organization great. And I think this group is in the process of doing that and deserves a special shout out. As well, I've had many professors, and I'm going to share with you a lot of ideas here. These ideas are by and large not original to me. They're things that I've learned from my professors over the last now 8 years in my experiences at Harvard Business School. And so if it seems interesting, it's not going to be original. And I want to make sure I give that attribution to them. It was Codman who said, I realized the approval of my students was more important than that of my peers. And I want to give a shout out to all my students who've helped me understand what it is to mentor and what it is to teach. I'm very proud of everything that they've done, and this is an opportunity to acknowledge that. And I think that's probably the greatest measure of anyone's career. Actually, it was Jim Hernan who told me that you're generally measured as a leader by who you hire, but I also think you're measured by who you train and what they do. Now, conflict of interest alert. One of the greatest teams with which I've ever worked is a group of individuals where I realized I was in a room with people smarter than me in a big way. But it was the selflessness of this group that has come together to basically change the face of how we do shoulder replacement from the standpoint of blending artificial intelligence with virtual reality and mixed reality, where engineers and surgeons and executives work together to create something really meaningful. There'll be a lot more about this coming out in the future, but I just wanted to share that with you because that's been a major part of my last 10 years. So where are we now? The world that awaits is full of threats and opportunities, and nobody would imagine that these are common times. We all have to worry about cash flow. We have to worry about the value we deliver to patients if we're physicians. And we have to think about how we should lead through this time and separate ourselves from the problem. Bert mentioned Codman, and I'm going to talk about Codman a little bit because Codman is a wonderful example of an innovator who wasn't necessarily the greatest leader. This is an organization I founded called the Codman Shoulder Society, which is nothing more than a group of physicians and non-physicians interested in innovation. Codman's words here give me something that is different, for there's a chance of it being better, speak to his role as an innovator. But as Dr. Zarins mentioned, more than 100 years ago now, well, not quite 100 years ago, Codman measured every patient's outcome. You can see these boxes of notes that he made on every single patient. And he believed everybody should be followed in their outcome until it could be determined whether or not the treatment was successful, and if it wasn't, why it wasn't, and how it should be improved. We've taken this to the level of trying to create a think tank of experts to do exactly what Codman would have wanted. We get together to look at how we can innovate and get better. This is one of our meetings. I was able to get Bob Kaplan and other business experts to talk to us about how we measure outcomes and deliver value and care to patients. I mean, this is a business proposition as much as it is an innovation. And I have a blog that everybody's welcome to visit if you want, where I do nothing more than curate from all the noise out there, things that may be relevant to your development and your professional career and your personal life, just because I like to read and I like to share, and it stimulates discussion. Now, it's a little bit difficult to be introduced. You know, what measure of ourselves do we take? And a lot of what I'm going to talk about is self-reflective. I can say that, you know, I'm a fan of Einstein, and Einstein, oddly enough, in his humble way, pointed out, I have no special talents, I'm just passionately curious. So if I'm anything, I'm a student, and that hopefully will come through here. This is where I work. That's where I'm sitting right now, giving this talk from. I've been here now upwards of 22 years. I've had the opportunity to create and to learn while I'm here. It's been just a great career for me. And what I'm about to tell you, I'm going to try to qualify according to what I think I know based on evidence and what I believe, so that you can understand that I'm not just being pedantic about it and telling you everything's true. Now, this talk is going to be broken up into 3 parts, and each part reflects my journey in my education, which I think will probably never end until I end. And that's sort of the template I got from my father, who you saw there. He's actually 93 now. Most people believe that success is a straight line. In reality, as you start trying to find what you think success might be, you realize it's a lot of twists and turns, and pathways quite circuitous with many detours. So when I thought to give this talk, I went to Google, which is where most of us go when we want to get an answer to something. And I thought, well, what happens if you Google the word leadership? And you know what? You come up with about 2 trillion results. Now, if you then look for leadership books, you come up with 603 million results. And if you look at TED Talks, you come up with about 41 million results. And if you go to YouTube, it's 618 million results. And it was Steve Jobs that said that there are a gazillion videos about leadership on YouTube and Amway, from Amway to Churchill to TED Talks and beyond. And frankly, it's a little bit daunting and kind of arrogant to imagine I'm going to give you information that you can't find in all of this, except I'll try to curate some of it from my vantage point. So with that in mind, let me take a stab at starting this. This is the cover of a very good book written by John Cotter, who's a Harvard Business School professor. And I'd start by asking you the question, who's the leader in this picture? Is it that one? Is it this one? Or might it be that one? And then follow with the questions, what does it take to be a leader? Who would you follow as your leader? And do all leaders need a title? Can leaders also be followers? Can followers become leaders? And are leaders born or are they made? And what are the most important attributes of a great leader? Well, let's consider that for a minute. Let's ask the question, do all leaders inspire us, and is likability a requirement? I know, and you probably do as well, that there are some leaders that are good and there are some leaders that are bad, and there are some good leaders that are bad people, and there are some bad people that are good leaders. And the circumstances are what result in people being inspired to follow someone, right or wrong. That doesn't necessarily mean they're good people. I also know that likability is an attribute, and it's really quite amazing how you see it now in the media. It's a war to see who's likable. Basically, likability builds trust, and trust builds durable leadership. It also builds social capital. Next question I ask is, does it take a long time to become a great leader? We have so many people who inspired us over their short lives, and while they may have led, their main impact, I think, was to inspire others to be great leaders. We should remember that even in a short window, we can make a major difference. And context is relevant as well. There's a difference between the type of leaders we need in peacetime and wartime. General Patton was one of the greatest generals of all time, and yet Atticus Finch was probably the greatest father figure ever in the book To Kill a Mockingbird and the movie. I think it's important to understand that context is critical to deciding who might be the best leader for a circumstance. Now, this is not an evidence-based talk, and in the same way that I don't need a double-blind study to figure out that I need a parachute when I leave a plane, I can make my points to you without really strong evidence. So let me continue on with my talk. So part one is basically a combination of mistakes and impressions from knowledge I've tried to acquire myself. And it was Socrates and Plato who said, know thyself. And there's no great leader who doesn't understand themselves before they try to understand and lead others. And it's also important to understand that we each of us have highs and lows. That's actually a trait of creative and productive people. And being aware of what you are each day is one way to get the best out of what you offer others. And I wonder how many of us realize that when we go to work each day. Bernie Morey was the dean at Mayo Clinic after he was a professor there, and he gave me the idea, or he told me that there are 7 pillars for leadership. I reduced it to 5 actually, they're pretty intuitive, I think. Family, friends, mentors, partners, and students. Now that's all true, except then I realized that that's mostly helpful for managing across and down, maybe less so for managing up. We'll get to that in a little bit. It's also important to understand that performance pressure builds better performance. I mean, that's really where most of us want to be if we want to improve. We don't want to do the routine day in and day out. It's a good thing to keep in mind when you lead others and you delegate, because you have to give them the opportunity to succeed, to show whether or not they should move up or not. While this is a cartoon and it seems sort of humorous, there's always some truth in humor, and how we each are perceived through the lens of others is important. And I'll come back to this again in a moment. But basically, surgeons are kind of here on the list. We're often viewed as difficult to work with. Our colleagues in our own institution really believe this. And I think that we have to be aware of that perception in order to improve how we perform in the context of the teams we may be in a multidisciplinary approach. That's probably the same in business as well. So ask yourself how you see yourself and where you come from before you seek to be a leader. Now let's get back to Codman. Dr. Zarin showed you this book. This was an amazing book, the first book on the shoulder in English, written in the 1930s. But in his epilogue, this man who was otherwise somewhat polarizing was quite reflective. And if you look at this page, which it's hard for you to read, let me help you with it. He analyzed graphically every element of his life over his lifetime in order to take measure of what he was actually accomplishing personally and professionally. It's amazing to me that he could be reflective and yet fail in his approach to others. And if you wonder what I'm talking about, let me just explain a little bit. In his 71-year career, he was a father of the end result concept, which became what we now know as value-based care. He created the first anesthesia record. He was the first person to use x-rays for fracture care. He wrote a book on hospital efficiency that was one of the first considerations of the business of hospitals. He created the tumor registry. But it was this cartoon that was displayed in the Boston Library almost a century ago that shows this ostrich kicking golden eggs to physicians who were being paid for things that perhaps didn't work. And he made fun of the president of Harvard, as you see on the bridge there, and the trustees of the hospital. And because of that, he wound up leaving Mass General Hospital, founded the Codman Hospital, which failed, and ultimately was buried in an unmarked grave until about 3 or 4 years ago when the Mass General Hospital, the American College of Surgeons, and the American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons put a gravestone there, and the inscription on that is his own words that said, "It may take 100 years for my ideas to be accepted." It's so sad that he couldn't have been a better leader to get his ideas across in the way he communicated sooner. Now, Churchill said success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm, and that's basically what we call resilience. And there are so many examples of this listed here for you to just understand that many of us wander and don't find our way. Even Arnold Palmer, one of the greatest golfers of all time, described golf this way, that the road to success is always under construction. And I think that's important to understand, that that's also the description of what the life of great leaders is. Now, in the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, he talks about 5 levels of leadership. And this is easy. Anybody who wants to read it can read it. But when you work your way through these individual levels here, what's striking to me and what parallels the things that I've learned subsequently are that great leaders have this paradoxical blend of being humble, but also having incredible energy and a professional will. They're also the greatest mentors. And there's a very small percentage that are able to do that. And in his sequel, Collins pointed out that in adverse circumstances, great leaders see opportunity. And there's this concept of return on luck. When something comes your way, taking advantage of it. There's also the concept of planning for the worst in the good times. When it's sunny, plan for when it's going to be bad weather. And great leaders are kind of like expedition leaders. They return 10 times what their comparators do in business. Churchill said, "A pessimist sees a difficulty in every opportunity, and an optimist sees an opportunity in every difficulty." So part two. Part two was my beginning of understanding this with more clarity when I went to Harvard Business School, first in Michael Porter's course here on value-based care. And then in 2015, I further pushed myself out of my comfort zone and wound up in a program on innovation where I was here mostly with venture capitalists in the program taught by Regina Herzlinger. And then I finally finished up my experience at HBS in what they call their alternative to an executive MBA. And for me, this was really important because I got to do something leaders should do, and that is to see the world through the lens of individuals from a wide variety of business spaces, from a wide variety of backgrounds in the world and ethnic backgrounds. And it really informs your own perspective on what you do when you return home and apply what you learn. So let me share with you a list. And while it's a bit trite to just boil this down into a list, think about these as I read them slowly and ask yourself what you think about this from the standpoint of leadership. Great leaders have self-awareness. Great leaders know to whom they're responsible. They know priorities. Especially nowadays, customers, employees, and cash flow are essential if you're going to survive as an organization. They manage up and they manage down. They're present in meetings and in conversations. They're good active listeners. They have guiding values that form the basis of their enterprise. They have empathy and insight. And they're able to say yes and rather than yes but, which is an inclusive approach. They have good communication skills. They have a clear purpose. They understand the difference between short-range and long-range goals, and they can communicate this difference. They build strong cultures, and I'll come back to that in a moment. They announce and engage. They know people's names, and they know who's a collaborator and who is a resistor. In fact, in this article from Harvard Business School, they looked at strong cultures versus weak cultures, and look at the bottom list there in the blue versus the orange, and you can see the difference in the return on investment here with each of these different types of cultures. In fact, great cultures are built on strong values that are recited every day. They should be straightforward and clear. They inform the mission, which is the purpose of the organization, and the vision, which is the mission to an ideal future state. And they create the strategy and then the execution. If you imagine an organization like the Patriots,
They strategize all week long, but the key is the execution. If you don't win on Sunday, nobody's happy. So let's consider cultures for a moment, and particularly let's consider a weak culture. This is from Michael Tushman's work, and this is a concept of an informal communication network. Each number is a person. Is that person the leader? Is that person the leader? You may notice all the arrows pointing there. Or is this one the leader? In this weak culture, 36 and 68 are the leaders. It was David Packer of Hewlett Packard that coined the term managing by walking around. And it's the concept of engaging everybody. And it's a part of managing down that I just mentioned, in addition to the managing up part. About 1% of people are ambidextrous, and it's the same thing with leaders. Now, that means that individuals can do the business of their day-to-day operations while still having the ability to innovate and take risk. It also helps inform us a little bit in understanding our leaders who have to manage the paradoxical situation of managing up, many times dealing with things that are not directly helpful for the people below them, and then managing down effectively. That should give you some empathy to understand how your leaders may struggle. Change process is something now, I think, especially post-pandemic, we're going to have to think about. Every single status quo that results in a new status quo that's better always goes downward, whether that's a startup company or that's an organization trying to change. Great leaders are able to manage that downward trajectory and get people to believe that there's an upward future. That's not an easy task. Then there's a question of emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman wrote about this, many have as well. It's the idea that one is able to manage themselves. And there are so many great surgeons, and Codman was probably a good example of that, of individuals who never seem to figure out the importance of building social capital by how they deal with others. Tony Mayo in his program further emphasized this and showed us this graphic that your authentic self is what informs what people see on the outside, and we're all layers. And most of us don't understand what's on the inside in order to appreciate how people see us on the outside. And it's this sort of looking glass that we deal with. You know, people see you different ways depending on what they want from you. And being aware of this every time you deal with individuals is very important. And in the words of the great economist and sociologist, Charles Cooley, I'm not what I think I am, and I'm not what you think I am. I am what I think you think I am. So what are you? Are you a giver, a taker, or a matcher? And these are really interesting ideas that got me thinking about what I want to do in my life. And givers are people that give without exception and don't think about what they get back. Takers are people that always want to come out ahead, and they want to keep the value for themselves. And matchers are people that are keeping a match list and deciding what they're willing to give in order to get something back. Now, it's interesting if you look at this matrix of concern for others and yourself, if you have a low concern for yourself and a high concern for others, you get burnt out by giving too much. If you have a low concern for each, you're disengaged and disinterested. And if you have a high concern for yourself and low for others, you're selfish. This is where you really want to be, where you take measure of those you lead and you go out of your way to help those who have the capacity to also deliver value and become great leaders. I was fortunate enough at the beginning of the pandemic to participate in an alumni program that Harvard Business School ran on crisis management. And that's appropriate for the times we are in now. This was taught by three great professors, Bob Kaplan, Dutch Leonard, and Amy Edmondson. They stated how you behave during a crisis will reveal more about your leadership and values than anything you ever write or do. And the process great leaders should take is what they call iterative, agile problem solving. Slow things down, don't make a rush decision. Tony Mayo said, the question is, in the face of adversity, why do some people find clarity, opportunity, and strength while others experience only confusion, helplessness, and impending doom? This is the Stockdale paradox. Admiral Stockdale was taken prisoner in the Vietnam War along with his men, and he had to manage in that crisis. And the paradox is that you have to be brutally honest about a situation and not speculate, while you provide a rational basis for hope and what you intend will be the end result. But you have understanding and empathy and perspective. Ask yourself how many of our politicians are doing this right now. And
I think the answer is a little bit troubling. So I'm at part 3 and getting towards the end of my talk. And let me dwell on this for a minute. This is a wonderful TED Talk by David Brooks. It's worth considering. He talks about, what are we doing every day? Are we building our resume, or are we building a legacy by the people we help? Tony Mayo, in our Authentic Leadership Development Program at Harvard Business School, shared with us his work looking at the greatest business leaders of the 20th century. And he pointed out that there's sort of a business accomplishment ADD, if you will, this desire to do more than you're actually really should be doing, this lack of focus. He said, everybody wants as many doors open as long as possible, and when they seem to be silently closing, we get anxious and have regrets. We talked about this already, your road to success, and success is something you have to define. It's something that you own, not something others should own for you. Now, I'm going to finish up a little bit by talking about teams. I alluded to this before. The power of great teams is greater than the individual involved in those teams. And these are 4 wonderful books written by Amy Edmondson that I strongly recommend to all of us who work in this hospital, and to anybody, frankly, who's working with teams, especially when you're trying to create value. It was Harry Truman who said, it's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. So let me talk a little bit about the teams I've been involved with. The Mass General West ASC team was created, it's about 14 years ago. And this organization was created out of necessity to improve a culture that would deliver results. And in fact, not only is it a fantastic professional and personal group of individuals, but it most certainly has delivered the highest ROI, I think, in this entire hospital. And 10 years later, it's no different. We continue to achieve over 99% patient satisfaction, and you'll notice most everybody here is smiling. This is what great teams accomplish. It's a little bit different in a large hospital like the one I work in, over 1,000 beds with multiple moving parts, and all large organizations are complex. These teams are somewhat more organic. They come together because they want to work together for the greater good, because they enjoy working together, because they want to produce value for patients. And that's been a wonderful thing to see and a wonderful thing to be part of. It's the same in our office that has, for the most part, had the same people working in it for several decades now. Now, in my role as chair for quality and safety, I get to see safety reports. And the number one safety report we see is communication problems. Now, why is it that way? It's because we don't form meaningful teams. Teams that work together, teams that are aware of each other's approach, are aware of the importance of stopping and speaking up and paying attention to the overall focus, which in this case is delivering value to the patient. The problems we have are when we have groups that work together that aren't usually working together in teams and don't understand the purpose of one another. And that isn't solved through digital solutions such as Epic, in my opinion. At the end of the day, you're most effective as a team player if you're happy. And this work by Paul Dolan was commissioned by the UK government. Paul Dolan is a professor at London School of Economics, and he looked to see who were the happiest in their work. And does it surprise you to see here that doctors are in the middle of this list here? Now, why is that? Well, the reason is that we are most happy when we feel that we're a resource and not a commodity. And at least in that environment, many of the doctors in the National Health Service feel more like a commodity than a resource. That's the way I read this. So how do you find your sweet spot? So the sweet spot is that intersection between your strength, your passions, and what others want from you. It's where you feel your loyalty. It's where you feel you belong. The danger zone is where you burn out. And that's when your strengths are, I won't say taken advantage of, but requested for things you're not passionate about by others who want you to do that kind of work. You need to be aware of where you are and what you're doing. And I'm not saying you can't be in the danger zone from time to time, but doing it day in and day out is a prescription for burnout. Viktor Frankl said, life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. So this is my last slide. These are my colleagues at the Mass General in the orthopedic department. Every one of them is an expert surgeon. Every one of them has spent years becoming an expert. This is exactly what Malcolm Gladwell talked about. But for those of you who didn't read this book, Gladwell pointed out it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert. And so my question to my colleagues, as well as to all with whom I work, is what will you do the next 10,000 hours? Will you become the best version of yourself? And at the end of the day, that's what a leader is. Thank you. These are just a few references for anybody who's interested. I can't say enough about Harvard Business School's executive education program, which I recommend greatly for everybody. And J3P Healthcare Solutions is a fantastic leadership group. That's it.
Okay, Dr. Zarin, you're on mute.
Thank you, JP. I think those are really wonderful words I think we should all listen to. I have a copy of Codman's original book here, 1934, and I'd like to read one sentence that he sort of wrote in here that I thought was very interesting. He says, "In order to attract the attention of the trustees of the MGH, I resigned from the staff in 1914 to protest against seniority system of promotion. On the day in which I received the acceptance of my resignation, I wrote again asking to be appointed surgeon-in-chief." It was an interesting approach. Of course, they turned me down. But I think that Codman was a great leader and shoulder surgeon. I think JP is cut from the same cloth. And I think that this idea of being accountable for your ideas and the end result is really, I really marvel at that. So I think we'll open it up for questions.
Silence.
Or comments.
Silence speak volumes. Have at it. Or not.
I think Henry Mankin was a chief here. He was I think a great leader and a great educator. And I think that's, I mean, I keep pushing on education. I think that JP has been a leader in education here too. And that's one of the things we also need, I think, in this industry.
Hey, JP, I've got a question for you. So first of all, outstanding talk. What I want to know is, we've all been discussing teams and efficiency for a very long time at MGH. Why is it that the culture here is so, for lack of a better term, resistant to trying to implement those things?
Remember what I said about ambidexterity? Great organizations have great brand identities, and that's the inertia that drives them, whether it's Mayo or Mass General. If we're talking about healthcare, there are other ones too, but great organizations don't sustain themselves on that forever. They have to reinvent themselves. I mean, look what happened to Sears, right? Look what happened to TWA. Look what happened to Eastman Kodak. The great organizations are the ones that reinvent themselves and build an enduring culture. And I think we're struggling with that. At least that's what I see from a quality and safety vantage point. It's not to say the people here aren't great. They are. It's just that when you become so complicated and so large and you have multiple brands within brands, it becomes very difficult to build functional teams that communicate effectively. And when you if you follow the process, let's take the patient as a customer. If you follow the process of the patient coming for surgery and where they come to the hospital and where they go and how they go through things, how many people touch that individual and process them rather than work together in a team approach? And, Epic largely informs that in color coding. That's the opposite of the way Cleveland Clinic envisioned what they do. And I've never been there nor have seen the effectiveness of it, but there are case studies about it, that they broke down their structure to create a customer-focused approach, a patient-centric approach, if you will. Now, are their processes better than ours? I'm not in a position to say, but that's part of it. It came through, I think, when we create smaller entities that are very effective, like at MGH West. We deliver great care. We deliver great return on investment. That was what Jack Welch did with GE. He broke down GE into multiple segments and held them accountable and rewarded each individual component for their success and penalized them for their failure. That's not how we're structured here.
So JP, how if you were Peter Slavin, how would you change things to make this talk so that you could solve the majority of problems that we brought up in this talk?
So Brian, I'm not surprised that you posed a question that could get me in trouble.
Well, I don't want to get you in trouble. No,
So I'm not
no,
going to
no.
answer that. I'm going to exercise some emotional intelligence, or at least try to. So the reality is that I have empathy for what he has to do. He has a multi-billion-dollar organization to run, and people are coming at him from all angles. That said, what many of our leaders at the top do that I would advise them not to do is lead from 30,000 feet. And now I've known many presidents here from Sam Thier on. And, you know, I ask myself, who's engaging and who's announcing? But to be fair, there's so many hours in the day, you can't do everything. I think that this institution and most medical centers are in danger of not understanding the greatest attribute that they have are the intangible assets, their people. Rather building giant buildings with brands on them and not understanding the importance of the people in those buildings. Now, I may be unfair in that assessment, but I think we're in danger of that. And I think that I tried to make that point at the end. Every single person is an asset to the organization. And the more they feel that they are constantly reminded that they are a resource, the happier they're going to be, the more productive they're going to be. I think that is a danger in this environment. I think many of my colleagues feel that way. That's the kind of what they call is a water cooler discussion when you're at the scrub sink and talking about things you're frustrated with. That would go a long way to affecting a culture that's durable.
Hey, JP, it's Mitch. Great talk. Really enjoyed it. A breadth of things that you brought up. Self-awareness is something that's really talked about a lot, but in order to make change, you got to be willing to accept some of those blemishes in yourself, even if you're very successful. Do you have any hints for us on how to get over that initial shock of the blemish and recognize that we can get into a better look with effort and maybe some pain, but effort to get there?
So there's two ways I'd answer that. One way is what I often tell people: you can't hurt me. I've had teenagers, so they're brutal in their assessment of your performance, and that does help you be a little bit better at taking criticism. And I will say this: I think that the trust that we build with the people who advise us, and you should all be so lucky as to have good mentors and good advisors, allows us to take criticism in a constructive light. It's when we have a background of distrust or distance from the people who give us this information that we tend not to take it in a constructive fashion. That's sort of my impression. You know, at HBS, one whole section of the time I was there, 2 full weeks, were basically people who didn't know you, who were getting to know you, telling you how terrible you were. I mean, you know, it's quite something, and they have no dog in the fight. So I think having some experience with being able to find yourself in a circumstance where you can accept these things and then try to actually change them, that comes from trust. It comes from sharing a team together. That's why teams grow effectively together. There's an expression that institutions have no collective memory, teams do. And when we're constantly having a revolving door, this is why so many companies are mediocre. They have leadership teams and others that constantly move in and out the door with the aspiration that if we get someone from outside to come lead this organization, we'll get better. But those people don't always understand the core values of that organization or the history that led to the problem in the first place. So it's a long-winded explanation, but I think it's a process, if you will, and it depends who's delivering the message.
Well, I would challenge all of us to recognize that we're at a unique opportunity right now. Clearly, a lot of the things that JP said are relevant to our current status. And I think we've accumulated and brought together a group that's really interested and willing to make a big change now. But it's up to everybody to participate in it, own it, and make it theirs so that we're not commodities and that, in fact, we are assets not only to one another, but to the institution. And I think we're sitting on a really good opportunity. And JP, I couldn't thank you more for the leadership and some of the insights that you've shared with us over the last several.
JP, I have a question. It's Pete. So I've had the great opportunity to sit next to you every Wednesday at when we're at the ASC, and I feel like I've gotten to know you over the past 15 years, specifically with that opportunity. And you've always been a mentor to me and someone who's given me a lot of great advice. But I have to say, about a year or two ago, I've noticed a change in you, in your leadership style, and just sort of the way you approach problems, and the way you've really become so interested in teamwork and working with people with different perspectives. And I was wondering, because I've also noticed, to me, and I don't know you as well personally, but you seem happier to me, and you seem like you're embracing so many things about what we do in a way that I don't know that 15 years ago would have been the same. And what was it that changed? Like, what was it? The business school? Was it the change in leadership at MGH? Was it something else? Because I feel like you've made a change in your life that a lot of us should try to do.
So, we all change in our lives. I mean, that's for sure. But I can tell you that for me, I can't stress enough the impact HBS has had on my career and my personal view. That's not just my teachers, those are my classmates. And it's an incredibly immersive, intense experience. I mean, I was one of the oldest people in my class. So, I've always been a slow learner. And, I sort of say that, your sweet spot, if you hadn't figured out yet, what's my sweet spot, I'll tell you in a minute. But I consider sweet spot is sort of that area where you've got enough wisdom to be of value to people, but you're not yet senile. And, my sweet spot is what I alluded to before, making a difference, impacting others, being involved in meaningful teams that create something that's valuable, that whether it's creating a new service or a new product. And I've been an entrepreneur many times over, which I have to say takes pressure off when you don't worry about your paycheck every day. That's just truth. That's reality. But beyond that, I think it's the understanding that it's always better to do something as a group and celebrate together your successes than do it alone. It's awful to do it alone. I mean, I can't imagine how Codman must have felt, because Codman, from what I can tell, his best friend was Cushing, who left as well. And he left the Brigham, actually, and went to Yale. And it must have been very lonely for him in his approach to have as his legacy an unmarked grave and a book that he published himself, because he couldn't get his message out to others. He couldn't get others inspired, if you will, in a timely fashion in order to take pleasure in what he had actually given to others while he was still around. It's after he left that we have all these other things like value-based care. So I'm just enjoying this part of my career, trying to have an impact, and that makes it worthwhile every day.
Hey, JP, Lars here. I have a question for you, a practical question. So I really liked your slide of the cavemen pulling the rocks and the guy trying to give them wheels, and they said they're too busy. So I was in my office yesterday with Evan O'Donnell, who's our new partner, and he showed me his website. And he's like, why don't you have a website? And I'm like, I'm too busy with my practice. So my question to you is, how do you carve out time to improve in your busy life? I'm just thinking, if I went home and told my wife I'm going to spend every weekend going to HBS, it would be a disaster, to say the least.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I don't know if my wife is listening to this or not. So I whatever I'm about to say I have to deal with it when I get home. But the reality is that you have to prioritize in context, okay? When you have little kids, you got little kids. And she's probably laughing her head off right now. But the reality is that, one of the best things about being a parent and being a leader is doing things on actually engaging the individual you're with, whether it's your kid or someone else, on their terms, not yours, okay? On their agenda, not yours. And there are only so many hours in the day. A lot of what I've done later on in my career. I mean, the early part of my career was just research and writing papers and then doing the best I could be as a parent. It's later in my career when my kids, became the people they are now. I'm very proud of them. They're all in finance. Another story altogether, but I'm not only the fourth generation physician in my family, I'm the last physician generation in my family. But it's that kind of a thing. I'm not saying everybody should run out and do this right away. I'm saying you have time to read, which is what I did. You have time to think about it, find people like-minded like yourself, and then take advantage in small aliquots. And I finally took the dive when I felt I had the time to do it. And it made a huge difference for me, even though it was somewhat late in my career.
Hey, JP, it's Gary. Nice talk. Getting back to what Stu said about culture after being here for quite some time. I think something you said was really important, that you really can't lead from 30,000 feet, right? And I think that's what has happened to the MGH proper, so to speak, over the years. And if you look at MGH West and what Claire and what David has done, certainly, and what Jeff did prior to that, was they didn't lead from 30,000 feet. And so getting back to Stu's question, I think without like deconstructing and reconstructing with a leader, such as Mitch has done. Mitch has been much more engaging than Harry was, frankly. And so I think that's what it would take to change the MGH culture. Without someone who is, kind of in the trenches with you, it makes it really difficult for the whole MGH culture proper to change tremendously.
I just want to comment on that. I purposely didn't look back. One of my colleagues once said, the reason the rearview mirror is so small and the windshield so big is that you want to look forward, not backward. And the reality is that you're always better when you create a flatter organization where, and it doesn't mean we have to be this highly, major academic medical centers are siloed financially, vertically, they're siloed horizontally. That makes it difficult to be effective as teams. You can break them into manageable segments and flatten everything so teams are accountable, and you can achieve what we did at MGH West in portions of the hospital if you really wanted to. That's just not the way they're structured. And I'm not in a position to say it should be otherwise, but I get the point. I think it's one of the reasons why, we joke about it, Pete and I do. We talk about, we're there every Wednesday. It's my get out of jail day. Not to say that things are so terrible at the main hospital. We have wonderful teams in our operating room there, but we could always be much better if we learn from the examples within our own organization of what is a hero versus what is a lost leader.
Hey, JP, Jim Kang here, and I hope I'm not stepping out of line making a comment. And I must say that I really enjoyed your talk, and I think it was very inspirational. And I will just comment that, Mitch and I have been put to the task of bringing institutions together. And I think, we all know there's institutional pride and institutional culture and politics. And one of your slides rang home to me, and that we all need to be individual leaders in our own little world. And I think I've seen examples of, Pete and Christian getting together, Scott Dykeman and Lauren getting together, spine service, trauma. We're all doing our part, I think. But I think most importantly, the concept of teamwork is unbelievably important, but not only from an individual standpoint, but institutionally. Just think of the missed opportunities that the MGH and the Brigham had when they just worked in silos, and we just let Baptists take over this town. I just think that we have a lot of work ahead of us. I know Mitch and I are doing our part, and I think you're giving us some great counsel and your support with this type of an atmosphere, and what we need to do is going to be incredibly important. So I just wanted to thank you for that talk, and I think that's very inspirational, and all the faculty should take heart in it, because I'm certainly sending that same message to all my faculty. And a shout out to Jim Herndon that I see on the screen, and I know he hired both you and I as our first jobs back in Pittsburgh, and he was an incredible role model. So thank you, Jim, and thank you all for, just a comment. Thank you again.
Thank you, and thank you, JP. I'd like to close with saying that Dr. Warner is a doer, but that carries risk. When you do something, you expose yourself to criticism. If you do nothing, you're safe. How can somebody criticize you because you haven't done anything? But JP, I'd like to thank you for being a leader and a doer, and for sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you, JP.
My pleasure. Everybody have a great day. Thank you.